News of the World is the first one we're going to jump into. The Tom Hanks movie, I guess I'm just going to say it's a Paul Greengrass directed film, but I mean this is really Tom Hanks showing out. I think making another run at a potential Oscar here, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But basically, Tom Hanks plays this retired captain from the Confederate infantry, which is an
Hmm.
interesting piece of this, who now is just traveling around from town to town, reading newspapers from around the country, people telling stories, making money off this. Um, it's I think in some ways I found this to be a super uh, uh, I don't want to even say like fun because I didn't find much fun about it, but it felt kind of like it went from like high point to high point to high point, where
Hmm.
there's this like father daughter relationship at the middle of this. Tom Hanks comes across Joanna, the
Yeah.
character's given name, but Cicada is the name given to her by the Native Americans who take her in. This orphan girl who's Native American tribe, and prior to that, her parents were killed, and he's kind of tasked with reuniting her with her aunt and uncle, who will take her in. So um, there's this journey where there's all these adventures, but in this really sweet relationship at the middle of it. Um, I guess just to maybe start setting the conversation, did you enjoy the movie? Did you find this to be a movie you would go back to?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's a little straightforward, but it's an on the road western. It's a familiar, you know, genre trapping. We understand what this is, and when it's done well, it's quite enjoyable, especially when you have someone like Tom Hanks in the lead. So yeah, no, I liked it a lot. I thought it was quite good. I mean, going in, I think a lot of people know this movie was held for the end of the year. Vying for Oscars, and I think as a movie, like maybe it sneaks in the Best Picture. It's in like the greater mix anyway, but like clearly, like that was really just reserved for like the Tom Hanks performance. But it's really Hanks just doing old Hanks again. It's not that different from like Captain Phillips Hanks or Sully
Yep.
Hanks. Captain Phillips also Paul Greengrass.
Hmm.
So, but it's just I think it's just well made
Yeah.
on the road western. So it's enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece that probably stuck with me the most is just it's really solid overall. Whether it's the cinematography, you have these really sweeping landscapes of, I think they're supposed to be in Texas or
Yeah,
traveling through the
it's
South.
Texas
Uh,
post war, so like 1860 late 1860s.
Um, so you have these really beautiful, just like sweeping shots of rolling hills and mountains,
Hmm.
valleys, deserts. I think it's the action scenes. Something with Paul Greengrass, you kind of expect the
Yeah,
scenes to be really
shaky
well done,
cam.
right? You known or probably best known for the Bourne movie. So if
Yes.
he's not making quality action scenes, there's something wrong. Um, but then also, I think like the way that the relationship between Cicada and the captain grows makes a lot of sense, and I think he hits all those emotional points. Maybe not to the degree that um, some dramatic movies do. Like I didn't find myself like tearing up or really being choked up by this,
No.
but um, I definitely was rooting for Hanks to come around and take the kid on. And um, I overall just incredibly solid. But I don't think this is a film that I'm going to look back on for this year and be like, News of the World is one you have to see. If that makes sense. I don't know if there's anything that it was like superb or exceptional about the movie. Did you feel like there's anything like that?
Yeah, and I think that's a thing too, because like dramatically, that's probably where it's like slightly weaker. I mean, and like I just have some quibbles about that stuff. I think early on, when he encounters the kid, it's like, oh, well, look at that, Tom Hanks burying the lynched black man. He might have fought for the Confederates, but he's a good dude. I'm like,
Right.
miss me with that shit, please. And surprisingly, there's very little mention of black people the rest of the way. Unsurprisingly, I should say. It's like, anyway,
Uh,
um,
but they talk about Mexicans quite a bit
Right.
Eh,
And like
Um,
There's also like not a huge Native American character presence. I was more
no.
surprised. I would have liked them to actually interact more. They're just kind of on the periphery. And I think, and then like that scene in the rain early on when like they're across like the gorge and you see them just kind of traveling.
Hmm.
It's like, oh wow, that's kind of like a haunting scene as you realize the girl is she is by all intents and purposes a Native American. That is what she knows. That is the culture she is a part of, and like that's pretty heartbreaking. But I
Yep.
would have liked to see more of that Native American culture. I kind of contrast this movie with Hostels, which came out a few years
Mm,
back when Christian Bale, just because that's a movie where you have Wes Studi and Adam Beach, two like the goat Native American actors, actually like being big parts of the film.
yep.
In this, the natives are just kind of on the side, even though Johanna Cicada is literally speaking Kiowa, right? Like she doesn't
Hmm.
even know English. I thought that was a weird choice. Maybe that's from the book. I don't know. I did find a big part of it pressing though. Prescient though. Like if you think about the beats of the film, after that like mountain chase and shootout, the next like set piece would be when they get encountered when they go to that new county and they kind of get like Hanks gets forced to like read the propaganda news by like
Hmm.
the businessman who kind of runs that like
Yep.
outpost town. And I'm like, oh, the
It's a little on the nose
yeah, it's a
for
little on the
sure.
nose about the character and the self adulation and
Literally being screamed at as the media to read the fake news
yeah.
was quite just like shoving it down our throats.
Yeah, and I was like, again, I don't know how much that's from the book, but either way, it's like, okay, well, we know exactly what that's supposed to mean.
Hmm.
Um,
And
and like,
especially because then the story that he reads that whips everybody up is about people like fighting back against like the
yeah,
man. So I was just like, boy, this is ham
right,
fisted.
yeah, and like the way that resolves too, you have it was John Callie, who's like, I guess he was just kind of wrapped up in Tom's Hank's storytelling, Kyle Kidd's storytelling, so he kills the other dude and makes his way on with his life, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from that, to be
Yeah.
honest. But we kept it moving, and it was well done. But like that scene, like I initially, I was like, I had like way more dread. I thought this was gonna be like this is like some bandit people, and like you
Yeah.
see it on the side, like oh, like they're kind of like slaughtering buffalo, and they seem to
Hmm.
have a certain uh, particular way about how they're operating on the West. They mentioned how they pushed out the Mexicans and the natives,
Hmm.
right? And yet it still kind of like lacked the punch I expected.
Yep.
Like this movie never gets nearly as dark as I thought it would, given again it's pretty grim times.
Well, and as I was kind of thinking about why this movie didn't hit for me more, and you kind of touched on this at the beginning. This character is a very like Tom Hanksy character, and he really kind of plays, I feel like, similar roles a lot of the time. And I'm almost wondering if, like, for me, I just have a little bit of like that Tom Hanks fatigue. Like, I guess the only movie I can think of recently where he didn't play like, a even if not like a complicated man, just like a straight up good person or a complicated man who's turned good in some way,
Sure.
is The Circle, where he's like a
Right.
villain, and in that movie it was a total flop, and his
That movie sucks.
performances wasn't didn't work. So it's like maybe maybe the Tom Hanks of it all is just where uh you know it doesn't hit the same way it did back in the 90s, so to speak.
Yeah, well, again, yeah, I think you're right. It's really
90s
just the
2000s.
choices because apart from A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, where at least like the Fred Rogers impersonation requires you to do little different things,
Hmm.
but like News of the World, Greyhound from last year, The Post,
Hmm.
Sully, Captain Phillips, like Bridge of Spies, it's the same stuff.
Yeah.
And again, it's not the biggest deal because Tom Hanks is old. Tom Hanks
Hmm.
is certified after the 90s. It doesn't
Oh,
really matter.
totally.
So he's just doing what he wants. And I guess what he wants is to do the same thing in different ways, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, I
It's all
mean,
right. The
I
rest of the
think
movie's
he
well made enough that I don't mind that much.
I think he's comfortable. He's established as like a brand, so to speak, and I think he just wants to keep in that lane. So good
Yeah.
for him, but I think that that does in some way kind of cap the movies he's in a sense. But any last thoughts on this before we jump into maybe a movie I'm a little more excited to talk about?
Like the movie we're about to discuss, News of the World as a universal release got to us on VOD 17 days after theatrical release. That would have been Christmas Day for that. And there, Universal is the only distributor to be doing this kind of hybrid model at this time. Keep an eye on that, see how this continues. I know, I mean, thinking about it, don't you think News of the World would have been better served with a day and date VOD release around the holidays when more people were around? Like, this definitely feels like a dad movie. Like, I know my dad wants to see this movie.
Hmm.
Like, I wonder if they missed their moment by waiting to the kind of nondescript time of Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, which I think in COVID doesn't feel like any other weekend, right? So, like, I don't know how many people put this on their calendar because I think the average person doesn't know that you can rent this 17 days later, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that's a good point. That I think if they had even done it that between that week, or like like dropping it right before the new year or something like that, they would have gotten a lot more buzz than now. It just felt like it just kind of dropped and came and went in a sense.